Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host for this program. You know, over the years, it's been a great pleasure that EWTN has given me to interview men and women on their journeys to the church, and they all come from a great variety of backgrounds. And the Lord uses a great variety of means to awaken their hearts and minds to the beauty of our Lord and His church. And tonight I'm just excited to have John Collier, former Episcopalian, as a guest. He's a sculptor, an artist, all church work. And what a great privilege it is to be with you, John, because all of our lives are so moved by artwork in general, but yours is beautiful. And I can't wait to now you can't do it yet. You've got to watch the program. At some point, I want you to go get your computer and go to hillstream.com and click on John Collier's name and look at the brilliance of his work. John, what a great privilege to have you here.
It's so kind of you to invite me. I'm thrilled. The journey home was really instrumental in me becoming a Catholic.
Well, praise God that it was a help for you. And you know, Mother Angelica's originally reason for having the program was to help Catholics be encouraged that their children will come back to the church when they when they hear stories. But we do know that it has a great effect on those outside the church. But welcome to the program.
Thank you. Some people read themselves into the Catholic Church. I watch TV into the Catholic Church. I did read a bit, but I also watched Mother Angelica, and I watched you and several of the other.
Well, I have a feeling that you kind of painted and sculpted your way into the church too.
I did.
Yeah.
I was. I don't know. If you want to go that.
Let's go all the way back.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go all the way back.
Well, I won't get into the art yet. Then I'll when I'm 5 years old, I'm drawing with crayons. But back then, I was my family, my mom and dad and brothers and sisters, went to the Church of Christ. And my dad was a song leader and a Sunday school teacher in the Church of Christ. And my parents are still alive and watching this show. But Dad started teaching that you didn't have to be a member of that denomination to go to heaven. And the Church of Christ is its government is a congregational form of government. So whatever the local congregation thinks can be implemented without having to do too much connection with anyone else. And so one night, this is my earliest memory of the church. They asked our family to come forward, and we came forward, and they said, "You're out of here."
Is that right?
Yeah. So that's the earliest I can remember. In defense of my Church of Christ friends, and I have several, that's not a normal thing for the church to do, right. And probably kind of cruel, but it's you can't.
In fact, that's I was going to say it's very unique, because if the very topic that your father was teaching is that you didn't have to be in that denomination to be saved, then when they kicked you out of the church, they were kicking you out to hell.
That's right.
I mean, essentially they were saying,
that's
you're
right.
outside the family.
Yeah, you're outside the circle. So we went from there. We went to a related denomination called the Disciples of Christ Christian Church. They at one time, I think they had been very close together, and they split apart. And that church, I think, maybe because of, again, I'm talking about something that happened very long ago.
Right.
And I apologize to anyone watching from Disciples of Christ, because I will caricature, I'm sure, their ideas, but they prided themselves on the individual being able to make up their own mind about what was orthodox, to what was right and what was wrong, and so that's what we did, and I did learn a lot of things. I was taught Bible stories. I was just a kid. Bible stories and music. There was a pipe organ in that church, and that I used to go forward after the church and sit beside the organist, because it was so beautiful. Just elevated the mind to God. And anyway, so I was in that denomination for quite a while. I'm trying to think of where to go next. One of the things.
One thing I wondered, when you're a young man like that, you're in church. Would you say that you, as an individual, had developed a relationship with God at that point?
No, not at all. But I'm about to get there.
Good. Okay.
The next, we went to church camp. This is about the 8th grade, and we were. Something unusual happened to me in that somehow they're always connected for me. A boy hit his foot with an axe, and he hurt it and couldn't walk well. So I was the biggest kid around at the time. So they said, "Why don't you carry him?" And so I put him on my back, and all day long I carried this boy who had hurt his foot. Then that night we were told to go out into the woods we're part of a little group of campers. We're told to go out into the woods and write ourselves a letter about the things that we saw and did in camp. And this was all by ourselves. And it was a very bright moonlit night, I remember well. So I went out and started trying to write myself a letter about what happened. And wham, it was like God came. I wish I could have that experience again, but it was a wonderful thing. It was as if my eyes were changed. He came, and I didn't know why. So I remember, though, being filled with love for the other campers and feeling how we were just kids. And you know how kids pretend to be what they're not because they want to be accepted. And I went back in tears telling them how sorry I was and how much I wished that we could not pretend to each other, and they couldn't figure out what was going, and neither could I. So that was my first experience with God, and was precious to me. But I went back home, and nothing much happened for a long time. Then when I got into the 9th grade, this was a time when prayer was being taken out of schools. It shows how old I am. I remember in the South, where I was in Dallas, school days would start with a hymn that was played over the loudspeaker and a prayer, and maybe scripture, but I can't really remember that. Anyway, that all went the way of all things.
Yeah.
And my mom and dad were upset, concerned about that. Because it had been a part of their experience as well. In fact, my mom talked to me about when she was in school, they would let kids out in the middle of the day, and they would go to a church nearby and have religion classes, and then they would come back to school while other kids would go to study hall, which seems like a pretty good idea even now. And anyway, so they asked me, what would you think about going to a Catholic high school? And my dad, Catholicism was about as far away from his mind, I think, as anything, as Mormonism or as any group out there that you might wonder about. And I had been looking at the back of National Geographics at the ads for military schools, not because I was interested in the military, just because I was interested in going someplace else. And so they asked, and I said, "Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to go to any place." And it was an exciting new kind of thing that had happened, that was going to happen. So I did. I went to Bishop Dunn High School in Dallas. And I'm really glad that I did. I took religion classes like everyone else. I was one of only about 3 or 4 Protestants in the school at the time. And I was taught by the Brothers of the Sacred Heart. And that was a wonderful experience. I wish I could say that it was I wish I could say that I came a lot closer to the Lord, but I didn't. I learned some things about the Lord, But as often said, knowing things about God and knowing God are two different things.
Right.
And so, so there I was in Catholic high school, and I stayed there for most of my high school time, and finally I decided I'm going to be a priest.
Really?
Yeah. So I said, I'm going to convert and be a priest. So I went to our Father Tim and told him what I wanted to do. And he said, maybe you should wait a little while to make sure that you're not being too influenced by your surroundings. And I think that was a wise thing to do for me. So I stayed there, and I had my best friend, Hub Hill, was a year ahead of me. And he said he had thought about being a priest. And I said, well, I do too. And he said, but I don't really know if I want to go. And I said, if you go first, he's a year ahead of me, and and then I'll go the next year. And he says, I don't know if I want to be a priest. Well, I'm sure I do. So so I'll just follow you along. So he went all the way through seminary, and the next year I met Shirley, the woman that I was going to marry a few years later. So poor old Hub went all the way through. He didn't become a priest, but I think he decided just before ordination that God had something else for him, and he did. So anyway, there I was in a Catholic high school, and
not really being drawn to the Catholic Church per se at the time.
Well, being a priest, I wanted to be a priest. Okay. I don't know if I was drawn to the Catholic Church, but I wanted to be a priest. Okay. If you could have worked it out some other way, I might have done it. But so I met Shirley, as I said, and Shirley's dad was a de facto youth minister at their church, what's a church called the Free Methodist Church. Right. The Free Methodist Church you've probably never heard of, but it was a little group of Methodists that got kicked out during the Civil War because they didn't believe in slavery. And there were, lots of people who did, and so they were taken out. They were kicked out. They called themselves free because they believed in freedom. They believed in the freedom of the Spirit. So my wife gets upset when I say this, but they were kind of charismatic in a way. They very experiential Christians, although they didn't speak in tongues. Right. But it was much more evangelical and experiential, wonderful, wonderful people. So I had to decide at one point, these people really, really seemed to love the Lord. And that was very attractive to me, that the Lord was someone that you could know. And no one had ever talked about that with me. So one night I remember I went to visit the girl I knew who was the most Catholic was Patty O'Brien. And Patty O'Brien was a friend of mine. And so at 2:00 in the morning, I show up on her doorstep, knocking on the door, and her mom wants to know, what in the world are you doing here at 2 a.m? But she let me in, and I talked to Patty for about an hour or so, because I was really, again, being drawn back and forth. Should I be a Catholic? What about these Free Methodists? They seem like such loving, good Christians. And it was then that I decided, I think maybe I'm going to be a Free Methodist. So I started going with Shirley to the Free Methodist Church, and from there I went to one of their colleges in McPherson, Kansas, Central Christian College, which is a wonderful school, it was populated by teachers who weren't making anything to speak of, but had a great love for God. And it was really I think it was this group of people that confirmed what had happened to me earlier out in the woods that time, that God was someone that you could know. He wasn't he wasn't distant. And I don't think I ever really talked about that with many Catholics at the high school. And it was it was an interesting thing happened after. This was just after Vatican II, and after Vatican II, virtually all my teachers left the
high school.
Left the when you stop being a brother, what do you laicize? I mean,
the religious orders.
And they got married.
Yeah.
So it makes me. There was a kind of understanding that I kind of absorbed while I was at the Catholic school, that if you wanted to be, back then, if you wanted to be a good Catholic, then you became a priest, a brother, or a nun. But the rest of us were kind of left to our own devices and, maybe spend extra time in purgatory, but there wasn't any, there wasn't the sense of the holiness, the expectation of holiness in just ordinary people. Which came along.
That would have been in the teaching of the church, but not necessarily filtered down into the
that's right.
teaching of the high school that you're part of. And sadly,
that's right. The teaching of the church is that you should know God, and that everything we do is so that can help you know God better.
Exactly.
But it was just being. It just didn't get communicated to me and to many other people, I think. So I went to a Free Methodist college, and Shirley and I got married while we were in college. And I stayed Free Methodist for a long time. And underneath my picture on this program, it'll say former Episcopalian. I'm getting there.
Okay.
But the Free Methodist Church, I think, had as much influence, maybe more influence on me, really, than the Episcopal Church. Mostly because it was that church that taught me that you can not only know things about God, but that you can know God. And when someone asks me today, what are you? I say that I'm an evangelical Catholic, that I'm in the Catholic Church, but I believe everything that was important to me when I was an evangelical, it's still important to me. Anyway,
had your interest in art started yet?
A little bit. My first job in art, I didn't study art in school. I thought I wanted to teach philosophy until I took philosophy. Then I thought I wanted to be a minister, but Shirley and I were just desperately poor. We were the church mice, and we went to. Eventually, I was able to get a portfolio together just from my own on my own steam, and. Got a job. My first job was changing lettering on radar plans at an aircraft company. So it was, rather than kill myself, I got a better portfolio together and was able to get a job as assistant art director at an ad agency, a very good one in Dallas, and got a little bit better portfolio together. And at that time, several of the illustrators in town got letters from a studio up in Minneapolis asking someone to come up there. So I was able to get that job, went up there. I'll make all this stuff quick because it doesn't really have much to do with my conversion. But from there to Houston, because it was really cold in Minneapolis, I was only there a year. And then went to New York, near New York City, worked as an art director at Time Life Films. And Catholic Church was, I can't say it wasn't on our radar because it was always, I was a Catholic high school kid, but certainly wasn't on Shirley's radar, although she met a priest in town and thought, that guy could be a Christian. So we...
I know that thinking. Having been in that, I know what you're talking about. Just not real sure, but then even John Paul, I think he's a Christian.
Well, that's true. No, that's exactly right. John Paul is a good example because he was the one that often came up. I think that man is a Christian, a real Christian, people would say. Other evangelicals would say. And we, let's see, while we were up there in New York, we went to New York to start illustrating. And I did well at my profession. I won lots of medals, and I did work for virtually every American magazine of any size, and lots of, I'm trying to think, well, I mentioned earlier, If you know the book, The Secret Life of Bees, a lot of people, it's a popular book. That's my cover. So I did, those are the kinds of things that I was doing. And while we were there in New York, I don't know why we did this. We said, not far from us was an Episcopalian church. This church had, we found out, had doubled in size in a year because the priest was very evangelical in his preaching, had a very high view of Scripture, and was had been a former Baptist preacher, and so he could people loved him, and the church was growing like crazy there, and we loved it, and it was wonderful to me when we visited. We only were there a short time, but you could. There was a kind of charismatic movement going on in the same church, and so you had the sense that the people could barely be held back in their enthusiasm by the Mass. And it was a wonderful experience to see people really excited about the Lord in this kind of liturgical setting. That was completely new to me. It was wonderful to me to see evangelicals in a liturgical setting. Yeah. But we moved, and there was no church, Free Methodist church near us, so we just kind of didn't go to church for a while. That probably, I didn't think of that as being anything unusual. That was odd. To a Catholic, that would just be...
Yeah, one of the sad things amongst non-Catholic Christians, and this developed out of Luther and Calvin and has grown, is this idea that being a member of a church isn't necessary for salvation.
Yeah.
If you got Jesus
Yeah.
and you're living according to that life, that's what's necessary. But really at the core, that's why that first experience of your dad and your family getting kicked out because you can't be saved in this church is fairly unique amongst non-Catholic Christians.
Yeah.
So the idea that, well, if you're in a different spot, you can't really find the church, and I don't go to church, doesn't mean you didn't have faith in Christ anymore. It's just not as important to go to church.
Yeah, that's
it's a good thing, but not as important.
Yeah, that's the way we had looked at it. But we, at one point we got a letter from the University of Kansas asking if I would like to come there and teach. And so I hadn't finished college, but I felt it was wonderful. I felt very honored to be asked. So I went to the University of Kansas and became a distinguished visiting professor, and still a Free Methodist, and that's another reason to go there because there was a Free Methodist church. And that again, I better go quickly here. Wonderful people. Just
we're going to take a break in a little bit.
Okay, great friends. Still have great friends there.
Had you started your Christian work yet in sculpture?
No, still not yet.
Okay.
I loved the Lord and wanted to do something for. I would sneak him in. I would sneak him into my illustrations. Actually, I would sneak Mary into my illustrations, even though I wasn't a Catholic, because people often asked me to do women in my illustration because the story was about a woman or a young woman, and it always seemed like there was something about Mary that always. I remember once I was in the University of Kansas at home, and I was just looking through old things of mine, and there was a rosary that someone had given me from high school, and the rosary just seemed like it just practically glowed in my hand. It didn't literally, but it just seemed there's something powerful and wonderful about this, and I put it away. But going quickly, we moved from there to an island in Puget Sound, and we lived in Vashon Island, overlooking the Sound. Yeah, do you know Vashon?
Yeah, I've had a guest from Vashon on my program.
Oh, well, Vashon is
a coffin maker of all things.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful place. But my agent stopped selling my work, and I was just in terrible financial shape because of that, living on an island far away from New York City. So we wound up going back to Dallas, where we were from, and we've been there ever since. And while we were in Dallas, going to a Free Methodist school, Free Methodist church, remembering that Episcopal church, and I haven't mentioned that C.S. Lewis being a real hero of mine.
Yeah.
I thought any church that can produce C.S. Lewis can't be all bad. So we started visiting an Episcopal church, Church of the Incarnation, at Christmas time. And we were just blown away by the great beauty of the Mass. The preaching was evangelical, and the Mass was just over the top beautiful. It's one of the great choirs of America. So our little Free Methodist church had dried up, and everyone had been commuting in for an hour to get there anyway. So we gave our church to a group of Hispanic Free Methodists, and the Anglos all went to the Four Winds, and we became Episcopalian. So we were that for several years, and I became what's called a chalice bearer. A chalice bearer is what we would call an extraordinary Eucharistic minister. And I liked it better because I got to dress up like a priest. And I wore a cassock and a surplice, and got to give people communion. That really was one of the great moments of my life, to be able to do that. But moving along, we were Episcopalian probably for at least 10 years.
Okay. Well, we pause there, John.
Okay.
Let's pause there, because it's time for a break.
It's a good time to break.
And I'd like to, when we come back, were any of the theological differences at all on the screen? Because you've bounced around a little bit with different traditions. Maybe when we come back from that break, just get that, because we're about ready to find out probably what opens your heart to the church.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll be back just a bit. Welcome back to The Journey Home. I'm Marcus Grodi, your host, and our guest is John Collier. I do want to again repeat, hillstream.com is his website, in case you want to click there and go to John's name to see his artwork, which we're going to get to in a little bit. But it's brilliant, and I'm excited to talk about it here in a bit. But
thank you.
We've paused. You've been an Episcopalian for 10 years.
Yep.
You bounced around Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, Free Methodist, a little bit of Catholic influence in high school, then Episcopalian. Was there theological issues at all during that?
The theological, by the time I decided that theology was something worth thinking about, it was a fairly smooth transition. Early on, I may be wrong about this, but it appears to me different denominations have different emphasis on. It isn't that they go necessarily, round the bend theologically, but for instance, the Church of Christ, it seems, is that right belief is the important thing for them. If you're a Christian, you're a Christian if you subscribe to this list.
They had like a rule or slide rule on how to interpret Scripture.
Yeah,
if I remember
that's right. If you believe these different things, then you're a Christian. The Disciples of Christ, I never really got into that. They didn't really tell me how to become a Christian. I just studied the Bible, and I think they just figured if you go to church, you're a Christian. And then the Free Methodist Church, you're a Christian if you have a relationship with God. And that's very important to me even still, because all of these things, the Bible, liturgy, the early church fathers, all of those things are important because they support this relationship that we have.
Yes.
And all relationships have rules, but it's the rules of a family. We have a father that we're close to. We have brothers and sisters we're close to. It's not a judicial thing. It's a family thing. So while I was, so as far as theology goes, The Free Methodists came out of the Methodist Church, so they have a kind of Methodist way of looking at things.
Mm-hmm.
The Methodist Church came from the the Anglican Church, so they have a kind of Anglican way of looking at things, which is passed all the way down to the
Right.
Episcopal Church. In fact, the institution of what would be for us the prayer of consecration of what is it called when it actually becomes
Right.
Christ's body and blood is unchanged in wording all the way down to the Free Methodists, all the way through the Episcopalians. So we talk about it in some ways we talk about it being the body and blood
Right.
of the Lord, and we don't mince words on it, but they don't really believe it in that same way that Catholics do. So theologically, it wasn't. I didn't have to go through something that, say, a more Calvinist person would have to go through, a Baptist or a Presbyterian, which is, in some ways, has some more difficulty than I had. So
Your all your steps, kind of like Tom Howard in his book "Evangelical is Not Enough." He
I
talks
love
about
that book.
But it was a trajectory for him in the same way.
That's right.
All the way to the church, and yours was that way. Each step was drawing you closer to the church, and especially its commitment to holiness, which is very much a part
That's
of Free
right.
Methodist.
The Free Methodist Church is part of what's called the Holiness movement within Protestantism. It's the idea, a Catholic idea, a very Catholic idea, that the person is not just called holy by a judicial or some kind of work of God. You're not really holy, but you know, the dunghill covered by snow thing. It's the idea is that the person is changed inside, that the person, that God does a miraculous thing, maybe sometimes over time, sometimes instantly, but He does a work of grace in the person to bring them closer to Himself. So that's kind of the theological thing that was going on.
So you and your wife were Episcopalians for 10 years, so you must have been happy there then.
Oh, I was very happy there. I held out this hope that the Anglican ordinariate would start up around, because I wanted dearly to stay with that music and the liturgy and I loved that church. But while I was there, one of the priests gave a course on early church fathers, and so I would go to this lecture on the early church fathers. And the book that we had was by Jurgens. You know that book? Yeah, that is a great book. If any of your listeners are interested in the fathers, Jurgens. How do you spell the Jurgens?
It's I think it's J-U-R.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's a 3-volume set. I'm not exactly the title of the fathers, the early church fathers.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get the title in a little bit. But particularly the first volume.
That's right, yeah.
The first volume are the earliest apostolic fathers. And what's beautiful about this book, for the audience's sake, is that it's the index.
Oh, that's right.
It's topical, all the teachings of the church, and then you can link to the statements of the early
You can
church
look
fathers.
up baptism in the back and then see where it's mentioned all through the fathers in the first couple hundred years.
It's a brilliant book, yeah.
So that was our textbook. And when you start reading the fathers, you might as well put a rosary around your rearview mirror because you're going to be a Catholic.
Yeah.
And as a matter of fact, I would talk to this priest after class, and I would say, I'm really thinking about being Episcopalian. This is right at the beginning of being Episcopalian. I'm really thinking about being Episcopalian. And he was not enthusiastic. And that disturbed me. But so it turns out, after speaking to him many times, he was on his way to the Catholic Church. And he became a Catholic priest, I think, in one of the dioceses in Louisiana. And I continued reading the fathers as a kind of hobby. That's the exception to the TV thing I talked about earlier. I read the fathers, and really, my thought was that early on, that if some of the things in Scripture are ambiguous, and they're obviously ambiguous, otherwise there wouldn't be 10,000 denominations, then if you just knew if you couldn't ask Paul what he thought, maybe you could find out what the person Paul was writing to thought that it meant, or John in the case of, say, Irenaeus or something. But so I did. I started reading the Fathers to find out what were the apostles actually thinking, and it's very useful in that way. You can find out. You can read a man named Saint Irenaeus, who was a bishop in Lyon in France, who was the student of Saint Polycarp back in Turkey, who was the student of John the Apostle. So it's that close to the writer that you can read, which is just a marvelous experience. Any evangelical, let's say you're watching, you don't want to be a Catholic, it's okay for right now, just read the Fathers.
And that book is called Faith of the Early Fathers by William Jurgens, Jurgens, and I highly recommend it.
That's right.
One of the things that struck me when I was reading the Early Fathers the first time was that when you read Irenaeus, and he's writing to Christians or defending the faith against heretics, you're reading in his writings the fact that there are things that he's accepting that they all know already.
Yeah.
This is the beliefs of all of them, and it's Catholic. I mean, you're reading that, it's like, whoa.
That's right. Well, for instance, he says, the knot which was tied by the Virgin Eve was untied by the Virgin Mary.
Yeah.
I gave when I was a Free Methodist in my Sunday school, they asked me to do a thing on Mary. So I went through the Fathers and I gave that quote from Irenaeus, and we read, we were reading the Bible. Therefore, all generations will call me blessed, except Protestants, which we all laughed at because they were. It was a wonderful Sunday school class. I'm going back to Free Methodist, and there were lots of closet Catholics, people on the way there. A history professor, my best friend, Bob Fairbanks, maybe I shouldn't talk about it. Anyway, he hasn't become Catholic, but he went on an exchange program to London, and he started going to the Anglican Church, and he was just blown away by the liturgy. There was an expression back then, empty formalism, when it came to liturgy. And Free Methodists would say, when he heard about the liturgy, empty formalism. And it can be empty for some people if you don't believe what you're saying, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah. And the danger is that we can project on the people.
That's right.
If we have an attitude, we can project onto others, and we just read into their liturgy, but it may be anything but empty formalism for them.
Just go and visit a church, and you'll see there are people there who are in love with the Lord. Well, going back up, I'll make this. So I started reading the Fathers. And my wife and I decided we're going to be Catholic. We might as well just be Catholic. And so I was about to do, although it didn't happen, a sculpture for Father Hawkins, who is a converted Anglican pastor at St. Mary the Virgin in Arlington, Texas. And he said, if you're going to go to RCIA, why don't you let one of the priests here give you RCIA, because he wasn't sure if I would pick a church that had one that he thought I should go to. Okay. And so a priest from St. Mary the Virgin came to our house and taught us our RCIA, and a wonderful man. And so then after a few months, he said, well, I think you're ready to be Catholics if you want to be. And so Shirley and I decided that we needed to find a parish now. We need to find some place to go to church. So we went around, and we were just so wanting church. We wanted our choir from Incarnation. We wanted our pastors. And the thing you should realize if you're thinking of becoming Catholic is you can't take your pastor with you, and you can't take your choir with you, and you may anytime you go somewhere new, you won't know anyone. So all of those things influence you. And it was disturbing, some of the masses we went to, because we were so accustomed. Often when every church has something which is useful to help contact you with the Lord.
Yeah.
And when you don't have that thing that you used to have, it's an adjustment, because you need that thing to help you. And it was music in this particular church. So we decided maybe we don't want to be Catholic. And we went back to Church of the Incarnation for 2 more years. And I went back to being a chalice bearer, and we always knew we're still going to be Catholic, but not now. So after a couple of years, finally, we said to ourselves, we're going to be Catholic someday, and we know what it's like to try to be Catholic, and we know what it's like to try and find a parish. Let's just go ahead and do it. So I was working on another project with Father Kelly up in McKinney, Texas, who I did a number of pieces for, and said, where's a good place to take RCIA? Because one of the problems of having a priest come and teach us, although that was a great honor, I didn't know any Catholics.
There you go, yeah.
And I didn't know there were devout Catholics, except the priest. So we went to St. Joseph's in Richardson and took RCIA, and it was a great experience. The room was full of people converting or teaching, full of people who loved the Lord, full of converts. I really recommend. I recommend that. So eventually we went through the whole process, RCIA, all the different rites that you go through. And we were at the tender age of 62. I became a Catholic for the first time, and so did Shirley. Mary and Joseph are my patrons, and I'm so glad that I'm a Catholic. I don't think twice about going back. It's everything that you. My experience was everything that was precious to me, I still have. I just have it in the church that was founded on Peter long ago. I wanted to be in Peter's church. I wanted to be in the church that Jesus founded on Peter, and so here I am, and Marcus is interviewing me.
How did your faith journey affect your artwork?
Yeah, I was doing art for the Catholic Church back when I was a Free Methodist. The first thing I did was an angel for just because the angels are pretty, and it got on the cover of a Catholic magazine out of the Archdiocese of Chicago. And a pastor saw it, and a priest, and said, would you do the art for my church? And I said, yes, I would. So I did. My first job was doing paintings and sculpture for Our Lady of the Lake in Rockwall, Texas. And then I've just started, over time, I started doing it. And as I became a Catholic, I learned more and more about Catholic things. I learned about the fathers. I learned more, even though I was already using typology in my art early on. It was actually my wife's father who taught me the concept of typology in our Sunday school class. But typology is so important as a visual clue, so you can do. It's often talked about in writing. People write about typology. Scott Hahn does some wonderful things with typology, but it's rarely painted or sculpted. And so I took up that challenge to do typology in my artwork, and I've, for instance, what would be an example?
Well, just in terms of typology, you've got David in the Old Testament pointing to Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
We have all these images. Jerusalem is the church and is heaven.
That's right.
So there's the idea of typology, Old Testament images. And we see Jesus in the Emmaus Road explaining to
That's typology. He has to be.
That's what he's telling us.
He has to be what he's talking about.
Yeah.
And who forgot to write that down? But for instance, Mary is the second Eve. Paul calls Jesus the second Adam because of the incredible parallel things that happen. For instance, Mary, well, let's talk about Eve. Eve, you got a woman, called the woman, standing underneath a tree. In the tree is Satan. He announces sin to the woman, and sin is born into the world. You have a non-fallen angel announcing salvation to the woman. Jesus doesn't call her mother, he calls her the woman because of this parallel. And salvation is born into the world, Jesus Christ. You have, again, a woman standing underneath the tree. In the tree is Satan. You have a woman, Mary, standing underneath the tree, the cross, and in the tree is God. You have the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. If you eat the tree of life, the fruit of the tree of life, you'll live forever. They have to get out of there rather than live forever in their sin. You have the tree of life. The early fathers saw the cross as the tree of life. And if you eat the fruit of that tree, Jesus Christ, you will live forever. So there are these beautiful poetic images going back and forth. In fact, if Genesis didn't exist, it'd be necessary to write it just out of the New Testament because of all these wonderful parallels.
God calling Abraham, and the message to Abraham going forward, well, that's the angel to Mary too. You have these parallels.
Yeah, you have an only father. You have a father with an only son.
Yeah.
The son, Isaac, carries the wood of sacrifice up the hill. When he gets there, he says, where's the sacrifice? Abraham says, God will provide the sacrifice. And you have a father, God, with an only son, Jesus. He carries the wood of sacrifice up the hill, the cross. When back in Abraham, they find a lamb, a ram or something caught by its head. One's assume its horns in the thicket, in the thorns. You have Jesus Christ. His head is caught in the crown of thorns. You have, there's so many of those wonderful. You have him Jesus in the garden. He's in a garden, and he's praying, sweating drops of blood. You have the curse in the garden is he will, as Adam will he will work by the sweat of his brow, and that the ground would yield thorns for him. So going back again, back and forth, it's just a beautiful poetic imagery.
I'm wondering, in your artwork, have you been called to deal with the mysteries of the church, like the Eucharist and the different imagery, even the Trinity? I mean, the mysteries of the church. Those are some of the hardest things to portray in artwork.
Yeah, that's right. I've done a tabernacle. That's probably the closest to what you're saying. In fact, I've just finished it for St. Gianna up in Winnipeg, Canada, and the idea, which really wasn't mine, it came from the pastor, that let's make one like the burning bush, because God spoke from the burning bush, and we could make a tabernacle where God is enthroned in the tabernacle. So I made one with flames that are kind of coming up, but we decided to make Moses' burning bush an apple tree. It doesn't say what kind of tree it is. And the reason is because, an apple in Adam's hand is a symbol of sin. But if you look at Renaissance and medieval paintings of the Christ child, he's often holding an apple, and it's a symbol of his victory over sin. So we have this Eucharistic place of adoration, and so that's probably as close as I've come to. Although I did do another tabernacle. I did one in North Carolina at St. Peter's, and I put the nativity on the door, a bronze door of the tabernacle. And one priest asked me, "Why did you use the nativity? It's supposed to be you should put the crucifix on it." And they already had a crucifix, but when you think about it, you've got Jesus is born in a town. What's the name of the town? Bethlehem. What does Bethlehem mean? It means the house of bread. So it's a little house like this that I made. And so he's born in the house of bread, and I have, and laid in what? A manger. What's a manger? A food trough. So it's very Eucharistic, and it's, in most Protestants, it just goes right past them, the Eucharistic nature of that event.
John, how over the years in your own spiritual journey, do you see your own giftedness in art, which again to the audience, when you go to his website, you'll see what I'm talking about, as a calling in itself. In other words, a vocation of expressing the reality of God in your life and to others.
I do. It's a lonely one. Usually ministries have people helping them, and we artists have a difficult time. Jesus said, if you forgot to praise God, that the stones would call out. We sculptors have been put in charge of the stones to make them cry out. I'm saying these things to encourage any artists listening. You should think about this as a potential ministry and a way to make a living, because it's a wonderful way to be an artist. There's a great deal of freedom. As an illustrator, the art director was always looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'm doing the right thing. But really, the people and the pastors of the places I work say, "We hired you to do something." So maybe this will get toward the.
And I hope it does. We are losing something. With the technological world, the electronic world, the skills of using our hands for painting, for sculpturing, for music are being lost.
It isn't just in churches. It's in the entire field of art. Right. Human beings aren't important in their mind, because human beings are just the product of blind nature, kind of turbulence of atoms that comes together and goes apart. So why is the art of a human being important? Why is anything the human being does? But a Christian has a reason to think that the work of human hands is important, that art is important. It lifts us up. There's often what's called reductionism in the world. They've reduced art to an emotional experience, and that's really all it is. Whereas we Christians, we Catholics, can say that it's more than just an emotional experience. It's something about beauty, truth, and goodness. That beauty and truth and goodness are eternal things because they are qualities of God, and God has always existed. So that's what we artists do. Writers make words about God, and we make pictures about God.
One of my favorite mystery verses in the Bible is Galatians 3:1, that says, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified?" Now, what's he talking about? The Galatians weren't there at the crucifixion, but somehow before their eyes, Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified.
Oh, That's
artwork.
Yeah, it has to be. I'd never noticed that before.
Or some might say, well, it was in the image of the Eucharist, the portrayal of Christ, the real presence of Christ, or the preaching, or was it the artwork, the early artwork?
Right.
Because when you can't read or you can't write, how do you communicate the faith? Through art.
Pictures, images were very important to the early church because, oddly enough, they were very important to the Jews. If you look back in the Old Testament, we often think of just, should make no graven image. But I'll try to make this fast. We're probably getting But if you look shortly after that, God spends chapter after chapter talking about exactly what he wants his temple to look like. And it's full of images, mostly sculpture, the cherubim over the mercy seat, the huge seraphs or cherubs, I don't know, at the front of the temple. And he not only that, but he picked a specific man he wanted to make this art, that it wasn't anyone to make the art. He wanted this man to make the art because he was most talented.
I think it was Bezaleel.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
John, what a great privilege to have you on the
Thank
program.
you very much, Marcus.
Thank you for your witness. And again, I encourage the audience to go to hillstream.com to see John's wonderful work. I pray that his journey was an encouragement to you. God bless you.